In the world of live television, few moments truly transcend the screen. But last Friday night, viewers across Burkina Faso and beyond witnessed a broadcast that would be replayed and discussed for weeks. President Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso's transitional leader, was invited to a prime-time interview on national television. The host, Alain Diarra, renowned for his sharp tongue and reputation for cornering his guests, was prepared for a spectacle. What no one expected was the lesson in humility, leadership, and humanity that would unfold before their eyes. A studio set for confrontation. The studio was buzzing with anticipation. The lights were hot, the cameras rolling, and Alain Diarra sat poised, his trademark smirk in place. Across from him, in a simple military uniform, sat President Ibrahim Traore. No guards, no entourage, just the man himself, calm and resolute. Alain wasted no time. "Mr. Traore," he began, his voice cutting through the silence. "How does a man with no formal political background lead a country torn by terrorism and poverty?" The question hung in the air, heavy and pointed. The producers exchanged nervous glances. Even the crew sensed the tension. But Traore did not flinch. He met Alain's gaze with unwavering calm. "Do you ask those who bleed for their people to prove their worth, or do you stand with them and ask what you can give?" he replied, his voice steady and clear. A hush fell over the room. For a moment it seemed as if even the cameras paused to listen. A nation watches. Across the city, in a modest living room, a 10-year-old boy named Karim watched the interview with wide eyes. His grandmother, frail and coughing, dozed beside him. Karim didn't understand politics, but something about Traore's voice felt familiar, like a father or a neighbor who had known hardship. Back in the studio, Alain pressed on, his questions growing sharper. "Some say you're just playing soldier in a real man's game. What do you say to that?" Traore's response was gentle, yet powerful. "I didn't come here to prove perfection. I came to serve, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." Karim, watching from his living room, felt a flicker of hope. He had never heard a leader speak like this. A shift in the room. In the control booth, producer Lucy wiped sweat from her brow. She had booked this interview expecting drama and confrontation. But what she saw unfolding was something entirely different. Each time Alain tried to corner Traore, the president responded with dignity and grace. As the interview progressed, a call came through from the Prime Minister's office. "Do not cut the feed. Let the people hear him. Let the truth speak." Alain, sensing he was losing control, fired another question. "Why should we believe that you, a man with no political dynasty, no elite background, can lead this country?" Traore's answer was a revelation. "Because I was that boy who sold mangoes to pay school fees. Because I still walk where others drive. Because power to me is not a crown, it is a burden, and I carry it for them." Lucy found herself wiping away tears. She realized, along with millions of viewers, that something historic was happening. Stories that change hearts. Backstage, a young intern named Adama watched from the shadows. His father, a soldier, had died fighting terrorists in the north. For years, Adama had resented the military. But as he listened to Traore speak of sacrifice and service, something shifted inside him. Alain, growing desperate, sneered, "I see your medals, but do medals feed our people?" "No, they don't," Traore replied softly. "But the sacrifices behind them protect the people who do the feeding." Adama, for the first time since his father's funeral, smiled. "Papa would have followed this man," he whispered. Personal pain, public leadership. The questions grew more personal, even cruel. "Do you ever feel guilty sitting in power while mothers bury their sons?" Alain asked. Traore's voice cracked just barely. "Every single night. I write their names in my journal. I meet their families. Power doesn't protect me from pain, it forces me to carry it." The studio was silent. Even Alain looked down, unsure of what to ask next. Traore shared a story of a little girl named Aminata, orphaned by violence but still able to smile. "She reminded me that leadership is not about control, it's about healing." In the audience, a woman named Keita, who had lost her son to a roadside bomb, burst into tears. For the first time in years, she felt relief, Someone was speaking from the soul, not a script. A movement begins. The viewership numbers soared. Calls flooded in from across West Africa. Clips began airing internationally. What was meant to be a tough interview had become a masterclass in humility and leadership. Alan, still searching for an angle, asked, "If you truly loved the people, wouldn't you step down and let a civilian lead?" "One day, yes," Traore replied. "But not yet. The house is on fire, and I am the one holding the hose. When it's safe, I will leave, not for glory, but so the next leader can plant without fearing flames." The audience broke into applause. Alan was speechless. A letter that broke the nation's heart. Before the break, Traore surprised everyone. He read a letter from Captain Sidibe, a soldier who had died the previous day. "If I die, please tell my son why I fought, not for medals, not for power, but so he can one day play football without hearing gunshots, so he can go to school with both shoes, so he can smile." No one in the studio could hold back tears. Redemption and unity. The interview ended, but its impact only grew. That night, people across Ouagadougou lit candles and gathered in silent vigils. The capital glowed, not with flames of unrest, but with hope. The next morning, Alan Diarra returned to the studio. Gone was the arrogance. In its place was humility. He looked into the camera and apologized to the nation and to President Traore. "He showed me what real leadership looks like." He stood firm, not for himself, but for every Burkinabe child, mother, and soldier. That is the man I now admire. Traore entered the studio, placed a hand on Alan's shoulder, and said, "This is how nations heal." That evening, the president walked through the city with Alan by his side. No cameras, no bodyguards, just two men humbled by the power of truth and the possibility of healing. A new kind of leadership. Burkina Faso will remember not the argument, but the healing. Not the questions, but the answers. And across Africa, the world saw that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that speaks calmly, and the greatest power is love for your people. As the cameras continued to roll, a silence fell over the set. Not an awkward silence, not the kind that could be broken by fake laughter. This silence was deep, heavy, like a heartbeat holding its breath. Alan had just asked a cruel question. Do you ever feel guilty, sitting in a position of power, while mothers bury their sons? Even the crew shuddered. But Traore did not react with anger. He just looked up and said softly, "Every night." His voice trembled slightly, very slightly, but enough. "I wrote their names in my diary, I met their families, I walked through their villages. Power does not protect me from pain, it forces me to bear it." There was no applause, no cheers, just the weight of the truth pressing down on everyone. Alan looked down at the papers suddenly, at a loss for what to ask next. Backstage, Adama wiped his face, noticing that his hands were wet. The boy who had resented the soldiers now looked at them differently because, for the first time, he felt that someone up there actually cared. Traore continued, "I went to a camp in Kaya where I met a girl named Aminata. The camera zoomed in, the air turned cold. She was 7 years old. Her father had been lost to rebel attacks, her mother to illness. She was lonely, but she was smiling." Alan raised an eyebrow, and what does that have to do with policy? Traore looked at him not with hatred, but with sadness. "Everything," she told me. "If I can smile, maybe others will smile too." That child reminded me that leadership is not about control. It's about healing. The room fell silent again. Somewhere in the audience, a woman named Keita burst into tears. She had lost her son to a roadside bomb 3 years ago, and had not watched politics since until today. Now her heart broke again, but not from pain, but from relief. Finally someone who didn't read from a script, finally someone who spoke from the heart. In the control room, the phones rang incessantly. Lucy's assistant shouted, "We've got calls from Mali, Ivory Coast, Ghana." Another voice shouted, "France is playing back the clip." Traore never raised his voice, but the world was listening. Alan, now sweating, tried one last time. "If you really love your people, shouldn't you step down and let a civilian lead?" The trap was obvious, the words bitter. But Traore nodded. "One day, yes." But not now, because the house is on fire and I'm the one holding the hose. When it's safe, I'll leave, not for glory, but so that the next leader can plant without fear of the fire." The cameraman whispered, "Fuck." Alan slumped, speechless. Everyone in the studio sensed the change. This was no longer political, it was personal. In homes across Burkina Faso, parents held their children tighter. Mothers reached for tissues. Children watched the screen with a new word on their lips: respect. As the nation stared at the screen, a staffer handed Traore a folded piece of paper mid-interview. He read it silently, eyes unblinking, then looked up at the camera and said, "Allow me to share this." Alan nodded, unsure of what was coming next. "This is a letter," Traore said, "from Captain Sidibe. He died yesterday in Djibo. He asked me to read it, if anything happened to him." The studio fell silent. Traore's voice did not waver. "Mr. President, if I die, please tell my son why I fought not for medals, not for power, but so that one day he can play football without hearing gunshots, so he can go to school with both shoes, so he can smile." Traore folded the letter carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Captain Sidibe is 31. His wife is watching now, along with their 3-year-old son. The camera panned to Alan's pale face. In the control room, Lucy's hands shook. Across the country, people weren't just watching, they were feeling. Just before the break, Traore surprised everyone. "I want to invite someone." Alan was surprised. "Excuse me." Traore pointed to the curtain. A young woman in plain clothes stepped out, standing straight and proud. "This is Fatima Traore," said a nurse. "She works in the conflict hospital in Fada and Gourma alone," the audience murmured. Fatima waved shyly. Traore stepped aside, letting her speak. "I sewed wounds without anesthetic, comforted crying children who no longer had families. But I did it for our people, they matter." Her voice broke. "Last week, rebels attacked our clinic. I hid 2 babies under the table, covering them with my own body. If it weren't for the army, if it weren't for President Traore's efforts, they would be gone." Alan was speechless. The audience sat still. The truth entered the room, wearing the smile of a nurse. Outside the studio, hundreds of people had gathered, holding candles, looking out the windows. This was no longer an interview, but a movement. The station was about to air a commercial, but Traore whispered to the MC, "One more minute." The crew hurried. He looked straight into the camera. "My father was a farmer. My mother taught me to read under a mango tree. We had no electricity, but we had love. That is what defines me. Not the titles, not the uniforms." He paused, then added, "I don't pretend to be perfect, but I promise you every decision I make. I ask myself, is my mother proud? Does the boy in Djibo understand?" There were no more spotlights, just a heavy, honest silence. Outside the building, the crowd began to sing the national anthem softly. Inside, Fatima covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Adama from a dusty tea house rose without noticing. In the studio, the camera was still recording because no one dared to cut the broadcast. Less than 48 hours later, the interview had become something else. A wake-up call. A mirror. The world was not ready for what Ibrahim Traore was becoming. But as soon as the cameras rolled, Traore made another surprise. "I got a message yesterday," he said softly, "from a 12-year-old boy in the north." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "His name is Yakuba." He read slowly, letting each word sink in. "Mr. President, I want to be brave like you. My father died when the bandits came. My mother cried at night. I don't want toys, I just want to feel safe. Please don't abandon us. Yakuba." Alan's jaw tightened. He didn't dare speak. Traore looked into the camera. "I hear you, Yakuba, and I won't give up." In a dusty village, 600 kilometers away, Yakuba sat with her mother by a neighbor's old radio. She cried, silently. The people in the studio were silent. The viewers were moved. The moment was no longer political but something personal, and for many, for the first time, they saw a leader, not as a figure on a podium, but as a father, a brother, a protector, a listener. Alan finally spoke, his voice noticeably softer. "But Mr. President, isn't this appeal to emotion just theater? It's easier to read letters than build a country, right? A sharp silence fell. Traore didn't blink. He stood up, walked to the center of the studio, and sat on the floor. Hardly anyone was breathing. I went to school barefoot. I ate from the same bowl with 10 cousins. My leadership comes not from books, but from pain. He pointed to the camera. If all you see is a man acting, you've missed the point. This isn't about me, it's about what we owe to those who lost everything. Even Alan lowered his eyes. Traore's voice dropped. I'm not acting, I'm remembering. The line cut deep, not just through the room, but across the country. Veterans watching at home saluted mothers, hugged their children tighter. Even Alan's producer wiped away tears. That night, no one slept. By 9 p.m., the streets of Ouagadougou were filled with candles. No one had planned it, it just happened. People came out, silent children holding hands, old people holding flags, women holding pictures of their dead. The whole capital was lit up, not with fire but with hope. A chant spread like the wind. Traore looked out the window of his modest home, turned to his assistant, and whispered, "Don't say anything from me. Let the people speak." In a small hospital, Fatima placed a candle next to a picture of Captain Sidibe. In Djibo, Yakuba's mother held him tighter. In the television station, Alan sat alone watching the interview on a small screen. He paused the video at Traore's last line. I'm not acting, I'm remembering. He stared, understanding for the first time what true leadership looked like. But something unexpected was about to happen, something that would change everything forever. The atmosphere outside the television station was tense. Rumors were spreading like wildfire. The journalist who had tried to humiliate President Ibrahim Traore had disappeared from public view for 2 days. Alan Diarra, once celebrated for his sharp tongue and bold questions, was now struggling in his apartment. Unshaven and unsteady, he rewatched the interview for the 100th time. Every question he asked, every sneer, every attempt to corner Traore now seemed cruel. But what broke him most was the president's composure. He had responded not with anger, but with calm facts. Alan looked out the window and saw 2 barefoot children walking down the dusty road, laughing with nothing but a stick and a dream. He remembered when he had been like them, when he wanted to use his voice, to defend the voiceless, not to humiliate those who served them. He collapsed to the floor and cried. Then he stood up. He knew what he had to do, something bigger than an apology, something the world would never forget. Alan asked to go on air the next morning. The station initially refused, but when they saw his eyes, they agreed. He entered the same studio, the same chair, the same camera. This time, he was not wearing a suit, just a simple shirt, his face humble. When the red light came on, he looked straight into the camera, not arrogantly, but with trembling sincerity. I failed you all. I tried to corner a man who had devoted his life to defending our people. I used my voice to divide instead of unite. He paused, his eyes moist. But President Traore showed me and the world what true leadership is. He stood firm, not for himself, but for every child, every mother, every soldier of Burkina Faso. That is the man I admire now. The nation fell silent, then applauded, then shed tears. Then